Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Pat Flanders, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Health Agency. Tom Hines is Director of Engineering and Technology Transformation for the Military Health System. We've got Sanjay Gupta, the Chief Technology Officer at the Small Business Administration. Devarius Peoples is Chief Information Officer, G6, for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And Mark McNulty, he's the Corporate Vice President and General Manager of U.S. Federal at Motorola Solutions. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. It's good to have you all on here with us today. And this idea of communication is really moved a long way from when you had a telephone on your desk in the office and maybe a two-way radio out in the field. In the age of data and IP over everything is pretty much with us now. And so we want to explore some of the options, some of the solutions people are looking at for this world of integrated communications. And Sanjay, why don't we start with you? Give us a sense of your field communications requirements and the strategies you're using, say, when SBA goes on scene to work with local businesses after a disaster. How do you do it?
Yeah, great question here, Tom. I would say that certainly we are relying on integrated voice and data circuits and solutions and technologies to enable that. Certainly we use voice over IP solutions extensively. But to the point about disaster field work, in fact, lately we have been reducing that kind of actual work. FEMA tends to do more of the actual field deployment. But from our perspective, we certainly continue to rely on the traditional mobile cell phones, and we are also providing the capabilities to do voice over IP calls through your cell phones as well. So there are common technologies that have been deployed in our agency, including others. Like Teams or Skype, and so we enable those capabilities. But let me give you another specific example of how we brought collaboration in a virtual environment at the onset of the pandemic. So we created a virtual command center for our front office and in the task force that was organized by the administrator of the SBA. And yes, some people were there in the HQ office at the SBA. But for a large part, most of the folks were working remotely. And so what we did was through this virtual collaboration center, which used Microsoft Teams, we were able to have all participants collaborate, including voice calls and or through asynchronous communications. And that was something very effective for us. We stood that up in 24 hours, and that allowed us to use that capability from our executive team standpoint. So yeah, we have been using these quite actively, and we continue to look for new opportunities. One final example I'll say is that we also use something called as Teams Live Events, and that allows us to reach out to, in one event, up to 10,000 potential participants. And obviously, with SBA being at the forefront of the pandemic response, we were doing a lot of outreach. So those kind of capabilities came in handy.
I guess we're in an age when pretty much everyone is in the field because nobody's in the office.
Correct.
All right, and Devarius, also it's true for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, an on-scene agency very often. Tell us about your communication strategies as they look today and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so one of the major lines of effort within, or major mission drivers inside of the Corps, is the disaster relief mission. And as you know, we're going through disaster relief now with regards to Hurricane Laura that has definitely pummeled the South. So the Corps has actually deployed units out currently right now. We're actually fighting those efforts. So when you start to talk about the Blue Roof mission, you start to talk about deployable units, tactical comms, and those type of things. We've been working with a lot of our mission partners to deploy a lot of those mobile units to provide and establish communications where those lines may be broken currently right now. So also when you begin to look at things such as laptops and effective comms, we're also fighting that mission as well too to support those. I think COVID-19 was another good example, building those alternate care facilities, being able to perform missions at the tactical edge, to be able to meet mission intent, to be able to support not just the stand up, but being able to log a lot of the data elements and those type of things. Those are some of the real world missions that the Corps has actually supported and are currently supporting now, to include being able to stand up mobile call centers. Because as issues arise, as you fight floods and those type of things, you don't necessarily know what you're walking into. but for residents to have the ability to call in and say, hey, I need help and those type of things. Those are just some of the things we're doing within the Corps of Engineers to kind of assist being able to move things forward from a technical perspective to help fight and enhance our mission as we go forward.
So it might be safe to say that in any situation like that, you're looking for a diversity of channels to have redundancy to be able to get back and forth with both voice and data.
Right, and we try to employ this triple active architecture. That's where we're modernizing. Currently, right now, we do have an active, meaning we do have some aspect of redundancy. But when you get into that triple active type of concept, that's really where we're ultimately trying to be. And through our modernization efforts as we move through 21, we're working to deploy that at the core.
And triple active, what are the three pieces that make the triple?
So if you look at it, when you think about physical sites, if you think of it from the side of a coin, you have three sides of a coin. So if you're, let's just say, performing maintenance, you have the ability to fail over to many different areas to where I can patch one aspect of and I can fill the other aspect of the traffic over to where it never goes down. Triple active means you're always up. That means your network never goes down. And when you're fighting floods and those type of things, you're 24/7 around the clock. So one of the things we've seen is that we take our network down maybe about over the course of a week, at least about 40 hours a week just for maintenance. And right now that's kind of unacceptable when you think about 24-hour mission because it doesn't stop. So our goal now is to continue to be able to patch, maintain the network. So we employ this triple active architecture, which gives us triple redundancy to where we are never down.
Got it. Okay. And Pat Flanders, let's move to you. I know you may have to depart the meeting a little early because of mission requirements, but tell us about some of the communications requirements, two-way or multi-way, and maybe outside of the confines of the agency offices.
Right. So, well, in the Department of Defense, we the Defense Health Agency work very closely with the services. And so you can kind of think of this as there's a fixed base component, and then there's an operational component, like a deployed component. And so in that deployed component, the services develop the networks that they use. I mean, so for things like the Mercy and the Comfort, right, they're running on Navy networks. And then in deployed areas of the Army, say, what they use to communicate is developed by them to support the different roles that they have in different units. The 82nd has different equipment. It's an airborne unit than, say, an armor unit, all tailored for those unique things. So that said, the Defense Health Agency builds the software that runs on all of those things. So we all work together. Now, for the fixed base hospitals, that's pretty much all my agency. And so there you find the things you'd expect, right? So we have Citrix established at the gateways of our network, which allows people to come in, and we configure it so that they can communicate using full desktop experience or only access to certain applications. I think most people know that the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer stood up a Microsoft Teams implementation at the beginning of the pandemic, which has been very helpful because it allows access from outside of the network. So you can use it with home computers on your Comcast connection or whatever and still communicate with people on the DoD network. And then in addition to that, at the beginning of the pandemic, it greatly expanded our Cisco CMS capability. It allows for voice and video. With the president's announcement of the relaxation of HIPAA temporarily, that allowed us to use some commercial things like Adobe Connect, Skype, and FaceTime that we normally wouldn't use. And then in the hospitals, cell phones, there's a product called Vocera, which allows doctors and nurses to communicate within the hospital, kind of like two-way radio kinds of things. And so that's just the gist of it. There are a lot of initiatives going on right now to evaluate things like wearables for tracking a virus and contact tracing. And then, that dovetails into, hey, how do you get the data off the wearables, the network? Will it work on ships the same way as it works on the land, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of diversity there too in the applications and in the methods and modalities of communication. Then let's move on to Mark McNulty of Motorola. and you've got kind of an across the government view here. Give us what it is you're seeing. What are the trends you're seeing in terms of what agencies are asking for, what they're planning, and what they're doing now?
Well, and thanks for having me, Tom. I mean, much of what I've heard here, I would echo. You mentioned at the beginning, right? The desktop phone, which has certainly gone the way of the buggy whip, and then the two-way radio, but which still exists very prominently out there in the field. In fact, I would say, we mentioned communications for on-scene disaster response. That's both voice and data, and mission critical push-to-talk voice LMR radio is still the gold standard by which those kinds of communications get done. Certainly across the military services, and Sanjay mentioned FEMA, as well as all of our federal law enforcement agencies that are there. And then data around situational awareness, right? And that's everything from cloud-based applications that we're enabling, that allow all these agencies to coordinate with one another and effectively respond and help communities recover. That improving of situational awareness also is now leveraging, we've heard some folks say, right, the commercial cellular networks that are out there, whether that's FirstNet, Verizon with their recovery services and others, really allowing us now to bring location information into our planning, both where our assets, where our people. In some cases, whether we're also in the body-worn video and mobile video space, car-mounted video or vehicle-mounted video. How do we bring that video back to allow folks that are in a command post or in a command center to get some view of the situation on the ground? So for us, a lot of it also becomes integrating these networks together, and that integration can take place at the network level. We're also bringing that integration together and allowing us to rethink, devices that are out in the field. How do we bring both the traditional LMR capabilities along with those broadband capabilities and mobile applications that are accessing cloud-based databases and functions to the user in the field, depending upon their personal preference.
So it sounds as if there's a pretty good element of reach back, almost bi-directional reaching, both from the field into the central office where some policies and financial decisions might be made. And
correct.
And
in many cases, we're taking the public safety workflow that used to be command center applications. Obviously, on a military base, there's a 911 center, computer-aided dispatch, records keeping. We're taking all of that workflow and mobilizing it into the field to give those people on the ground the same type of information that might have previously only been available to folks sitting in the command center. But we're also giving the command center through that application and the feeds that are coming in from the field users, giving them greater visibility to what's actually going on in the field.
Interesting. And I want to go back to Pat Flanders because you mentioned, there's a activity of close association with the armed services and also the fixed installation. So it sounds like that is really a trend that you might also see from the standpoint of the Defense Health Agency.
Right. And so, well, if you think about it, hospitals exist, on installations, and the installations are either joint, run by the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and so the hospital, is dependent upon the services of the installation, and those kind of emergency communication capabilities are unique to each one of those installations. And I know that in some cases, some of the services have picked one solution and implemented it service-wide, and others they haven't. But it really is kind of a local thing with respect to what happens on the installation. And then again, in the deployed environment, those are also run by the services and developed very specifically for the units that they're going to be fielded in. Things like, I'm going to date myself, but Blue Force Tracker in military vehicles, right? So that's a communications capability used to fight wars as well as ask for support and help when not in wartime, those kinds of things.
Okay, and we're going to take a break in just a moment, but before we do, I want to kind of introduce the topic here that we're going to get to next, and I'm going to throw it to you, Tom Hines. I sense that there is cloud somewhere in the mixture of all these base-related, field-related activities and communications and data exchanges. Fair to say?
Yes, that'd be correct.
And can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, if we're picking up on the prior discussion specifically, some of the things or some of the innovation we're looking at has to do with how we communicate between members of care teams in our facility. We've had a number of pilot programs going on, but consider this description a little bit. You have a patient and an entire care team. In our system, it's not really a single patient to provider relationship. There's really a team associated, particularly when you're talking about an inpatient encounter. So members of that care team then need to be linked to one another to be able to communicate in more or less real time and receive messaging also in real time about the condition of that patient. Or let's say there's a specialist associated with the care of that patient and there's a need for that specialty care capability, then they can call that person in and begin communicating, and then using things like text messaging via the phones, their phones in particular, and this is all mediated via cloud. They can receive additional information about the patient's conditions and the need for that care. Finally, in addition, by using the wireless network in the facilities, we know not only where the patient is because we have location capability on beds and gurneys and that sort of thing, but we also know where the entire care team is located by physical location, and then of course we can quickly communicate with that person, or we can get them moved to an area where they're most needed. So that's an innovation we've done, and again, that's all mediated via a cloud service. We haven't made a selection of a product like that for deployment across the enterprise, but again, there are a number of pilots already in place.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a short break and get back into this whole topic of cloud after we come back. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is Cloud Strategies to Fulfill the Mission, sponsored by Motorola Solutions here on Federal News Network.